Hi, it's Alistair from Electric Scotland. I thought I'd just do you another wee resume of parts of Electric Scotland that you might not know of or might be ignorant of in total. I was talking to someone the other day there from America, and they were saying, there's not a great deal of history that they can find on the Scots in America. And I said, well, I've got a huge section about the Scots in America. Why don't you read our American section? They said, well, where is it? We've never come across it. So I thought, well, maybe I better just tell you a bit more about it. I'm actually quite proud of the section. It's basically Scottish connections around the world, and as you may know in my site, I usually say it's the history of Scotland and the Scots at home and abroad. And the abroad part means that I'm examining there the Scots that actually emigrated to the world, essentially. And I thought I would try and follow up on that. So normally any country I feature, I'll do it on the index page of the country. I'll give a bit of background to that country itself. And usually I'll put some history of the country in, because, for example, if someone immigrated in, say, 1790 to America, then I thought it'd be useful to know what America was like around 1790. So you would get a kind of feel for what these immigrant Scots went into and what life was like at that particular time. So that's what I've tended to do with all the various country sections. Now, all of that's cut under the Scots Diaspora link in the menu. And it's on the right-hand column, and it's forward down, it says Scots Diaspora. So if you click on that, you'll go to a little introductory video that I did some years ago, telling you about what the Scots Diaspora is. But then I go down and I kind of list all the various countries. Now I've got a wee logo which shows the American flag and the Scottish flag, and in between them a wee Canadian flag, because America and Canada were by far the biggest countries that were recipients of Scots. And so the first section is USA, and if you just click the USA, you go to our index page there, where you can learn about the history of America. In fact, I've got a 1 hour 40-minute historical video up about the history of America up to, I think it's 1932. And so you might enjoy watching that. But I've got the history of the Civil War up, and the history of the American Commonwealth. And I've actually got a very detailed section on the history of the southern states of America, as well as some of the individual northern states. So I've got a huge amount of history purely on America. But the thing is, at that particular time, you can't read the history of America without coming across Scots. Because the Scots, apparently, in the early 1700s, accounted for about 9% of the population of America. First came Germany, then England, and then Scotland. And the Scots-Irish were about 6%. So if you put the two together, 15% of America's up to about 1700, and so we're actually the dominant the dominant race basically in America. So if you click on the USA link, then they say what you'll get. The very first section is American History on Electric Scotland. And under that, I've got Scots-Irish in America. Both of those are huge sections in their own right. But I've got a link to the British Embassy, the British American Business Council, a thing on the White House, the National Tartan Day, USA Today for news and information, and First Gov, the US government's official web portal. And then we've got some additional links which I've added on, which are pretty good. Frank Shaw's book reviews. Frank's a Scots American, does book reviews of mainly Scottish books, and also a series of articles on Robert Burns called Robert Burns Lives. So he's a great Scots American and covers a whole ton of stuff, which I think you'd all find interesting. I've also got Best Newfangled Family Tree. Beth Gay, of course, has been producing the Family Tree newspaper some 15 years. And it was done from the Moultrie Library in Georgia. But the library decided to give it up, and so because she'd invested in 15 years, she felt there was still a market, so she's continued it under Beth's Newfangled Family Tree, it's now called. And it's a PDF publication, comes out twice a month. And we've got huge archives of that on the website. Then I've got a bit about Alexandria in Virginia, because they had the walk there every year, Christmas walk. Got Moultrie in Colquitt County in South Georgia, the Texas Scottish Festival and Highland Games, the Grandfather Mountain Games, got the annual gathering of and games of the Caledonian Club of San Francisco, got a nice article on Scots in the USA, and then I've got a tribute to America on the 11th of September 2001, and the Hurricane Katrina. So that's the main stuff that I've got on the main page. But if you click on the American history on Electric Scotland, then it'll start off there with, as I say, that video, 1932, A True History of the United States. And I say it's about 1 hour 40 minutes, if I remember rightly, so that's interesting. Then I've got an historical account of the settlements of Scottish Highlanders in America, got the American Civil War story, and how the army runs. That's a senior leader reference handbook of the US Army, produced in 2013. Then I got the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography, the American Commonwealth by James Bryce in 3 volumes, How Scotland's Influence Created the United States' Sovereign Identity and Laws, it's by Gary Giannotti, he's from New York. Lamb's Biographical Dictionary of the United States, William Winter, he's a poet, writer and critic, another Scots-American, Trails of the Pathfinders by George Bird Grinnell, the Memoirs of the Governor's Task Force on Hunger, that's in Washington State, which is a rather interesting one. Got the American Commonwealth, American Military Biography, containing the lives and characters of the officers of the Revolution who were most distinguished in achieving our national independence. Also the life of Gilbert Maubert Lafayette, Major General in the Continental Army, Marshal of France and Commander-in-Chief of the National Guard, and that was in 1830. Got the life and military character of Major General Scott. I mean, there's a whole ton of stuff basically within there. And there's lots of individuals and lots of groups. You know, like we got the American railroad builder, John Murray Forbes, another Scot. We've got the life of John Patterson, Major General in the Revolutionary Army, by his great-grandson, Thomas Eggleston. That's a fairly recent one. British Artisan Expedition to America. The life, public services and addresses and letters of Elias Boudinot, who's president of the Continental Congress, and that's in 2 volumes. I mean, if you just float through it, there's a whole ton of stuff, like Scots and Scots Descendants in America by D. McDougall, a book in 1917. And if you go right down the page, you see there's absolutely tons of stuff there to read. But you'll get part 2, and when you click on part 2, wall, you can go to another great big long list of stuff. So I mean, one and all, there's really a whole ton of information on all parts of America within that. But obviously our main thrust is the Scots connection to America. So, you know, it's, as I say, there's an absolute ton of stuff there. And just reading all the headings, you think, oh, I wonder what that is, and oh, I wonder what that is, you know. It's like A Tale of Two Families. The MacDonald family and the McDuffie family would eventually join in marriage in America. Got Alexander Butt, Justice of the Supreme Court, is there. List of Scots prisoners sent to New England for the period around 1651. Because bearing in mind a lot of Scots first went to America as prisoners. So, and lots of little things like Ohio Tartan Day, for example, a story of a pioneer, a Scots-Irish in New England. So there's a whole ton of stuff basically there for you to enjoy and watch. But as well as American history and electric Scotland, we also got the Scots-Irish in America. And again, that's a huge section in its own right. And I've got a very good video up about the Appalachians, the Scots-Irish. And I've got links to two very good videos, which is Born Fighting, the Scots-Irish, Part 1 and Part 2. Both of these are hour-long videos, so they're really interesting to watch. We've got the Scots-Irish in history, colonial Scots-Irish immigrants, the Irish records, the Scots-Irish, the 13th tribe. But also I've got the Scots-Irish in America, and this is, I've got the whole proceedings of the first Scots-Irish Congress in Columbia, Tennessee in 1889. But I've got not only the first one, but I go right through to the 10th. So I've got the first 10 proceedings. So all in all, I mean, it's, while I would say the first one was in Tennessee, second went to Pennsylvania, then Kentucky, then in Atlanta and Georgia, then the Tennessee again, Iowa, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, then back to Pennsylvania for the last one, the 10th one. So again, there's a huge amount of reading and everything that you can enjoy within that section. So that's just the American history, which is tons of it. I've also got features on Moultrie in Georgia, Alexandria, Virginia, and Pins and Fork in Kentucky. Then on to Canada, because Canada's a huge section in its own right, and I've got focuses on Guelph in Ontario, Caledonia in Ontario, Prince Edward Island, Kimberley in BC, Cape Breton in Nova Scotia, Elliot Lake in Northern Ontario, Chatham, Kent, and Crieff in Ontario. All of these places I've personally visited. So these are my own accounts of actually being there. So a whole ton of information. But of course, clearly I've also started the Electric Canadian, which goes way beyond it, and it's not just on Scottish, that one of course, but... And then if you want the other areas within it, I've got the Scottish connections in Ireland, and I say there's a good amount of information under Ireland. We've got the history of Ireland itself. So if you click on the history of Ireland, you'll find that we've got again a fairly huge section there, because we've got the clans and families of Ireland and Scotland, Annals of the Four Masters, A History of the Irish Race, Irish History on the Web, Crookston, the History of Ulster, and as I say, there's quite a few videos out, bearing in mind that the videos are always from YouTube, and YouTube videos can disappear, which they have. I've got the BBC Story of Ireland, and that one is episode 1, but this video has been removed for violating YouTube's terms of service. Oh dear. So it's maybe around, usually when I say if it's videoed, just take like the BBC Story of Ireland and just do the Story of Ireland, go to YouTube and click it in, it's maybe turned up again. In fact, I'm just doing that now just to see. So if I go to youtube.com and click in the search box, the Story of Ireland, and it's got the Story of Ireland 1 to 5 is in the search box. So there we go, Story of Ireland 1 to 5, Age of Invasions. Then Age of Conquest is up, that's number 2. And I've got Story of Ireland, Age of Revolution 3 of 5, Age of Union, and Age of Nations. They're all about 1 hour. They're all 59 minutes long, so basically an hour. But the whole lot's there, and it's got a playlist for them all. So it'll play all of them running if you click on that list. So, in fact, what I'll do is I think I'll...
There is an island shrouded in cliché.
Here we go. I think I can probably change that link or something. Anyway, I'll do that later when it's done. I'll fix that by the time you read this. There'll be a new link to that one. So it will appear, as this doesn't appear at the moment. But obviously it'll be a good start. 2, 3, 4 and 5 are all available there. So as I say, I'll get number 1 and I'll replace the number 1 episode. So the whole 5 sets will still be there. But as I say, the history of Ulster itself is fairly detailed. It's I'm thinking, remember, it's a multi-volume book. This, I think. Oh yeah, and I might just say that there's a good video there, God's Frontiersman, the Scots Irish. So there looks to be 4 episodes of that there as well. And the history of Ulster is a 4-volume publication, under which I've also got the Scot in Ulster, which is another book. So all of these books are available for you to read, but tons of basically videos, which are all good stuff. I mean, within that, there's a whole ton of great information. Now, when it comes to I've got Australia as well, and Australia is pretty amazing, because obviously there's a ton of Scots in Australia as well. And again, when you go to it, I don't know whether all the links work. I haven't checked the links for a long time, but for example, if you go to the Australian page, you've got Australian Scottish history, which will take you to our content on history for Australia. But I've also got other links: video of Australian history, Australian Government, Tourism Commission, Radio Australia, The Age, Sydney Morning Herald, the Great Australian Gazetteer, House of Representatives. Whether all these links work, but what I always try to do with each one is give you some major links to centres of government and stuff of that nature. And then on the right, I give you some links to histories of individual provinces like Queensland, Capital Territory, Western Australia, New South Wales, Tasmania, Northern Territories, Victoria, South Australia, Norfolk Island, and online guide, and something on citizenship as well. And also a nice wee map is there, which is kind of interesting because it shows you how the whole of Europe will fit into all of Australia, which just shows how big Australia is. So that again is quite interesting. That. Then we've got again a good new stuff on New Zealand. There's also great history of France, Russia, Germany, Argentina, Iceland, Sweden, Poland, Netherlands, Middle East, UK overseas territories. We've also got Hungary, Africa, Serbia, Montenegro, Spain, Italy, Japan, China, South America, Scots around the world. I might add that I have a huge amount of information on Scots in India, because obviously we spent a lot of time there. So if you click on India, if that's of interest to you anyway, again you'll see a wee video. But I've got the Highland regiments that fought in India, and I've given you links to the regiments where they talk about the service in India. And I've got an historical disquisition concerning the knowledge which the ancients had of India and the progress of trade with that country prior to the discovery of the passage to it with the Cape of Good Hope, with an appendix containing observations on the civil policy, the laws and judicial proceedings, the arts, the sciences and religious institutions of the Indians by William Robertson. And again, there's a nice wee video there, but as I say, I've got a whole ton of links and all kinds of stuff to all kinds of things in India, so good stuff there. I've also got Scots and the American Indians, because that was pretty amazing as well, the connections with the American Indians, because a couple of the chiefs of some of the major American tribes were actually Scots, like the chief of the Cherokees was one. And then I've also got a bit of a history of England itself, Isle of Man and Wales, because obviously we emigrated. And in fact, if you go to England, it's quite fascinating, that one, because I've got some very good books about the Scots there. But I've also got some information like, Scotsmen sitting for non-Scottish seats numbered over 130, noticeably more than the Irish, with 45 seats in Scotland almost monopolised by themselves. The Scots still needed more scope. The eldest sons of Scottish peers who were not eligible to created peers of Great Britain until 1782 could not sit for seats in Scotland, and they're among the number. In addition, some Scottish peerage families had English or Welsh interests, notably the Butes. Apart from them, the Campbells created Lords Codder had Welsh interests. The Johnson family interest in Weymouth brought in Scots members. The Dundas interest in Yorkshire introduced members of the family, but by and large, far more Scots than Irish might properly be termed adventurers. Their own country could not support them. Many of them were nabobs: John Agnew, John Alexander, Bannerman, Sir George Dallas, and a whole host of other names are listed, come to mind. It says this was no coincidence. The East India patronage bestowed on its countrymen by Henry Dundas was at work. Apart from dominating Scottish elections, he also occasionally returned Scots for vacant English seats in which he was able to exact ministerial influence, and Scottish Whigs were more or less driven out of their country by him to look for seats elsewhere. Only 23 of all these members ever sat for Scottish constituencies. The rest crept into every corner of the land for their seats. They were more likely than the Irish to be of mercantile background. London Scottish merchants were often ambitious of a seat in Parliament. So it's it's quite fascinating if you actually read the diaspora. I think I've probably got the biggest collection of Scots diaspora material anywhere in the world. But we've also got Scotland, Scandinavia, Northern Europe, Scotland, the Caribbean and the Atlantic world, and Scottish Soldiers of Fortune, and I've got some Spanish translations. I don't know why I've got Spanish translations, but I believe it's because someone was actually of parts of clans and families of Ireland and Scotland, of the Gaels. It's by C. Thomas Kearney, MD, that was the book, but I think someone was quite interested to translate some of it into Spanish because there's some good Spanish connections there. And of course, if you do go back to a list of companies, I think, we have Spain as a separate section in its own right. And in there I've got like the Spanish Gordons and Huntly, the Royal Scots College in Salamanca. I've got History of Spain up, and the Spanish influences in Scottish history. So that whole Scots Diaspora, you might say, that one little menu will give you tons and tons of readings in all parts of the world. So huge amount of information there. I might also just add that if you're missing your church services, if you go to our religion section, just That's in the fourth column, religion. It says religion in Scotland. I've got a huge amount of information up there, tons of biographies, and of course that's where we put the home school up, or the home preacher rather, up, but that's where I put it under that. We've got life's problems, events and crises and suggested readings, but as I say, we've got some general ones like the home preacher, the home school, or hints on home education. We've got family worship, and we've got good words. That's by that Norman MacLeod, if you remember rightly. Fantastic reading, really. We've got the history of the Church of Scotland up. We've got our Scottish clergy, 56 sketches, biographical, theological and critical, including clergymen of all denominations. This was produced in 1853. We've got the hymnology of the Scottish Reformation. We've got a Gaelic Bible, Gospel of Mark, the Scots Confession, the Lord's Prayer in Middle Scots, Matthew in Middle Scots, John in Middle Scots. We've got the Genesis chapter in the Scots language, Bible quotations in the Scots language, forbidden Gospels and Epistles. We've got quite a few e-texts that I picked up over the years. But we've also got Muslims and so forth in Scotland, so I've got like the great religions, an essay in comparable theology, got the Quran up, the religious duty of obedience in law, and I've got some of the world's great sermons, 25 village sermons by Charles Kingsley, sermons on evil speaking, The Chosen People, Compendium of a Sacred and Church History for School Children. Got the Woman's Bible, Sacred Connections, the Ladies of the Covenant, Self-Interpreting Bible by the Reverend John Brown. Who wrote the Bible? But if you work your way through it, I've got like the Scots on the River Plate and their churches. That's a book about the Scots in Argentina. So as I say, I can say there's really a huge amount of information on that religious section alone. Scottish stories from the family treasure, old church life in Ballingry, the history of a Fifeshire parish. Scottish Christian Herald, volumes 1 to 3, sketch of the life of William E. Phillip, missionary of Hankey, Scottish Congregational Magazine, Life and Letters of John Peterson Strother, late minister of Greenock Reformed Presbyterian Church, the Vale of the Sabbath, the Valley of the Sabbath rather, the Scots Worthies, Book of Common Prayer and the Scottish Liturgy, History of the Kirk of Scotland, the Chaldee Church, Jacobite Stronghold of the Church, Records of the Scots Colleges, the Story of Pilrig Church, Looking for Nuns, the Abbey of Paisley, Presbytery of Ross and Sutherland, Diary of George Ridpath, Minister of Stickle, with notes and introduction by Sir James Balfour. And again, it just kind of goes on and on and on and on. Bearing in mind that a lot of these ministers that did work, a lot of them were brilliant people. Not only were they great missionaries and explorers and everything like that, but a huge amount. It says, like the day of trouble, plain words for the suffering and sorrowful, selected from the writings of the Reverend W.R. Mackenzie. So, like that, there may be something in there that might help you with these shootings in Canada, for example, I had recently. I've got the history of the Reverend Alexander MacLeod, who's a Gaelic-speaking minister. I guess what you would say that is that I've also got some stories for children. Like Grandfather Tells the Children the Story of the Great Flood, and I've got an audio recording of that as well, so you can listen to the story being read to you while you follow it on the screen. And then Grandfather Tells the Story of the First Tartan. Grandfather Tells the Children the Story of David and Goliath. And Grandfather Tells the Story of the First Nerde. So these are kind of fun things as well. And don't forget the home preacher, in every single one of their sermons, there is a special sermon for the children in each one of them. So a whole ton of stuff there under the religious section. In fact, that's why all these sections are there, because there's a whole ton of information under each one. I think the only thing I'm a bit unhappy about is the postcard section. It's just never really worked out very well. While in theory I've got a whole lot of cards you can pick, a lot of the pictures aren't showing very well. Although if you actually send a picture, they actually look pretty good. But certainly if you're just ploughing through various pictures, then you might find that they're pretty, well, they don't look that brilliant, they look pretty fuzzy. But in actual fact, when you see the whole picture, they're good. But I've never really, it takes a lot of time to do it, and I'm beginning to think maybe I should just remove that from the site really. So I'm considering doing that. But anyway, what I mainly wanted to do was tell you about the Scots Diaspora and the huge amount of content I've got over on literally most countries of the world are there, or certainly all the significant ones, with great information about the Scots connections with those countries. But as I say, I mean, even the other day I was updating, and you'll hear a bit about it. I'll tell you a bit about what's in the newsletter, but I've got a humour pages in Electric Scotland, and so I've got lots of individual stories, but I've also got whole books that are quite amusing. But I've just added a new video section. Basically it's because I did a wee hunt for Scottish people that are doing something on YouTube, and I found a few, like Marley13. So his channel mainly focuses on gaming, comedy, including Call of Duty, GTA 5 and many more game trolling and parody videos. Home of Officer Marley and the best Scottish banter videos on YouTube. Apparently he gets a lot of visits, so I thought I'd put a link to them. Then Mairglen Robertson, I don't know if that's how you pronounce her first name, but she's a comedian, improviser and storyteller. Margaret is a native Shetlander who explores the world from the perspective of an islander. In her downtime, Marjorie likes to wander the hills of Shetland, listen to heavy metal and drink red cans. Her website can be found at, and I've given you a link to her site. Kirsty Bryce is someone else. My name's Kirsty Bryce. I'm a Scottish YouTuber, and I make content about horror and movies in general, health and hilarity, mainly because I am a complete joke, and sometimes you've got to laugh at yourself. Then I got someone else, Sean. Hey, I'm Sean. Great to have you here. I'm a Scottish vlogger from Edinburgh, and on my channel I will be sharing Scotland with the world through vlogs, as well as offering my perspectives on Scotland, the UK and the world. I also hope to connect the enormous global population of people with Scottish ancestry with our wee country through the medium of entertaining vlogs. Also, I just want to make people smile and have fun. Adventure, everything is my motto. It's a reminder for me to push my comfort zone further out and say yes more. So if I find anyone else, or you know of anyone else, maybe send me an email and let me know and give me the URL to them, and I'll look at including them in this wee section I've got here. Okay, so there you go. That was really the main purpose of my video, was to give you a bit of an insight into how much other content is on the site, but certainly the Scots Diaspora was the main reason for doing it this time around. And so if you're an American, I have heard figures that most Americans know little or nothing of their own history. In fact, I remember seeing a little, it was a small, I think it was the BBC, did a wee article about how poor the Americans are at their own history. And like, people were asked, what was the Civil War about? And apparently a lot of them hadn't a clue what the Civil War was about. Some of them didn't even know there had been a Civil War. Well, that was a major historical event, and to not know anything about that is pretty amazing, really. And then just simple stories about history and stuff like that. This went to students at a local university, and they say they knew nothing about American history. It was pretty terrible, really. But I mean, I don't blame Americans. I mean, history has only ever been interested 1% of the population, so there again, I just happen to love history. I think you can learn a huge amount from it, so you don't make the same mistakes more than once, So, but anyway, that's really why I thought I'd highlight, because if you want to know the history of your own country, or then if you go to the Scots Diaspora section of the site and go to your country, you'll probably find out I've got a fair bit of history on your country, and you might be able to learn some things from that. Okay, so hope you enjoyed that, and as they keep saying, as I'm watching more YouTubes, if you like it, you can subscribe, and if you hit the wee bell, it means that if I put a new one up, you'll get an email telling you I put a new video up, so you won't miss any of them that way. So, okay, without more ado, I'm off to do my newsletter now, and I'll incorporate this in with the newsletter, and you'll get it later tonight. Okay, take care everyone, stay safe.